Good morning. I'm Monisha Avery, Deputy Director at the Center for Data Insights and Innovation, or CDII. We're happy that you've joined us today's webinar, Teleworking Effectively, Teamwork in a Virtual World. But first, a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to CDII's YouTube channel. You'll be sent a link to that recording in about a week. You're likely already familiar with Zoom, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of its features. The chat function is located on the lower toolbar. I encourage you to leave comments and ask questions during the presentation using the chat function. We'll answer questions as time allows, but if we aren't able to get to your question during the webinar, we will have responses to all questions at our post-webinar email, including the PowerPoint slides. Also, look for links to resources we will be dropping into the chat. If you need subtitles or closed captioning, click the live transcript button on your toolbar below. Now, building an effective team and running effective meetings have always been key components to working successfully. Now, an abrupt shift to a remote work environment has added challenges that we've had to adjust to on the fly. Collaboration and communication are fundamental aspects to working with an interdepartmental team in a distributed work organization. The term distributed work generally means one or more employees work in a different location, physical location. This presentation is meant to provide information that can help you understand and adjust to working remotely. It's important to know that it will not cover state policies or replace any direction you may receive from your department. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker, John Oden. John has written, code, and led teams in organizations ranging from 4-person startups to nonprofits to multinational, including in the US government as part of the US Digital Service in the Obama White House. He is a strategic advisor for leaders, runs tactical workshops, and helps draft legislation and write policies for multiple jurisdictions worldwide. John has worked in physically distributed teams for 28 years. He has led distributed teams for 14 years, and he's coached and mentored founders and executives for 7 years. In 2018, John helped write the state of Vermont's remote worker laws, a very different approach to economic development, which was so successful that it has since been used as a model by multiple other jurisdictions. John's book, Distributed Teams, The Art and Practice of Working Together While Physically Apart, is an easy-to-read business management book that covers how to work in and run, as well as the benefits of distributed organizations. And as a bonus, we will be raffling off a copy of John's book to one of today's lucky attendees. The winner will be notified after today's webinar. So now, John, take it away.
Well, thanks for the introduction, and good luck to the raffle winners, I guess. Let's start with, of course, the basics. Can people see the slide? Yes. Thumbs up. That's great. And do people see a new slide? Also, yes. Great. Thank you. So we'll start here. I want to keep in mind that this is going to be covering a couple of different things. We're going to be very strategic on a few things, but also very tactical. And please do ask questions as we go along. Misha and Barbara are going to keep me honest here and interrupt as we go along. We intentionally want a lot of interaction. So if there's things that are on your mind as we're going along, jump in. And I'll start with, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of bad news going on. So I want to remind you that actually there is also some good news. And so just kind of keep some of this in mind. First off, if this is your first long-term working from home experience, this is not normal. So just don't, it's easy to confuse that if you think that working from home is the same as working from home during a pandemic, during social economic upheaval and social unrest and situations have been going on. This is not normal. Like, I know plenty of people who've been working from home long-term for years who are stressed out. And it's got nothing to do with the fact you're sitting at home as opposed to an office. It's got to do with the fact you're worried about someone getting sick. You're suddenly doing homeschooling where you used to send your kids to a school with professional teachers. Maybe you know a lot of people who've lost their job. Maybe you're worried about losing your own job. These are real human stressors. So this is separate from should you work in an office or work from home. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to this later, but this is an important reality check. The other thing to keep in mind is that long before COVID, myself and many other organizations have been doing this at scale for years and decades. So it's totally possible. So that's a good news thing. We'll talk about some social trends that are making this a popular thing to do already. So people were shifting to this as a way to work before COVID, and COVID's accelerated that. And then the last one is keep in mind that this is not just high tech. I am a computer guy. I'm in Silicon Valley, so everyone will immediately jump to, oh, this is just for the techies. I've worked with all sorts of organizations that are not in the computer business who are physically distributed. So it can be done, and it is being done. You might get some upsides. You might actually find you've ironed out some kind of weird paper cut internal process problems and made things work better now. So you can actually find ways to improve how you operate, and you can also find ways to hire people better and retain people longer. So there's actually some good news here, which we'll go into. And the last thing I'll say is just a terminology thing. You want to be careful about the words you use. Words matter. And so there's a weird hidden bias that'll come through depending on the word you use. So if you say virtual work, it implies that you're real and the other person is virtual, meaning they don't matter as much. And no one wants to be considered a virtual, not important person. Same if you say telework. I have a complicated job, but your job is so simple you can do it on a telephone. That's a downshift, that's a downhill thing. Remote work implies I'm the center of the universe, you're remote. You don't matter as much. And by the way, I don't have to worry about the communications work. It's your job as the remote person to do all the communications work. All of these things show a hidden bias here, which is you think you're the center of the universe and the other person's not. And the important words to use here are that you're all part of a distributed team together. You're all responsible for communicating. You're all responsible for the work you do, and you all have meaningful jobs with meaningful career. You just happen to not sit beside each other. So watch the words you use here. Quick social background thing. I'll go very fast through this. One is, long before COVID, we've started getting rid of the idea of a job for life. The average, this whole job for life thing went away somewhere in the 80s, 90s. The average job tenure in the United States now is about 4 years, a little bit over 4.2 years, something like that. In Silicon Valley, it's even shorter. It's down between, these are high brand name companies, it's down from 2 years down to 1.2 years. That means people are always looking for new jobs. People are always recruiting to fill the spots left by the person who left. It means if you're always looking for a new job, people are less willing to move for a new job. Why move for a new job if you're going to give up that job in a year or 2 or 4 years and move again? So national migration patterns within the US have been dropping since World War II. This is where we have here. Another factor here is that we now have 2 income families. So now both people working, who gives up the job to follow and be the trailing spouse if the other person gets a job? And why would you do that if you're going to be moving again in a few years? So that's a real factor. And the last one is 36% of Americans don't have $400 spare in their bank account. That includes people with jobs. That means they can't afford to move even if they want to. So people are not moving. That's been going on, again, this is before COVID. Other thing that's worth keeping in mind before COVID, 2016, millennials became the largest segment of the US workforce. And in early 2021, during COVID, Gen Z became the second biggest segment of the US workforce. Now, these 2 segments are important because as far as they're concerned, smartphones always existed. Free streaming video on your smartphone always existed. High-speed data plans for your smartphone always existed. The idea of socially walking down the street on a video call with a friend is normal. And these digital natives have different expectations of tools, of usage. And when they come to an office environment and sit down at a desk with a desktop computer, then a telephone with no video, they're like, what has happened here? Because they have better communications tools outside on the street, walking down the street. These are digital natives. These two largest segments of the US workforce are not represented in federal service. And I was trying to find similar data for California, but I couldn't. They're typically underrepresented in government. In federal, it's only 6%. We have to change. If you want to hire in these segments, you have to change the tools and the usage and how you work with them. There's another factor that's been going on, which is if you have people changing jobs and you require them to come to an office, so if they have to commute to a building and they don't have a job for life, it means they have to commute. And even if you live across the office, live across the street from your office for the first year or two, when you change jobs, the next job will be somewhere else. The next job will be somewhere else. In about 5 years' time, you're now working for companies that are not near your house. In 10 years' time, you've now in a wider range, and you're changing jobs faster than the location you live in can change public transit systems, which means you have to drive because the bus or the train doesn't go where you need it. More and more people are driving. So this is from the California Air Resource Board, and people will talk about emissions from agriculture. Well, that's 7 or so percent. Emissions from power plants is about 9 or 14%, depending on how you count it. People talk about carbon footprint of airplanes, that's 1%. Trucks and buses, that's 8%. The biggest wedge of emissions in this pie is passenger vehicles, 28%. It's by far the largest wedge here, and most of this is people driving to work, and most of that is in stop and go rush hour traffic. The worst way to drive an internal combustion engine car. So we can look at this. There's a few things we can do here. A project the state of California did with their Telework Dashboard that I think is interesting. First of all, the dashboard is live data. It's not a report that's done every year. This is the live data pulled from existing systems. There's a whole bunch we could talk about here, but it tracks the number of people who actually came into an office last week. And you can see, like out of the 15 or so thousand people, 11,000 people had jobs that are telework eligible. There's some people who could not come into the office because their job, there's some people who had to come into the office because their job is telework, is a job that requires them to be there. It's a location-specific job. And if you have a location-specific job, like you're a security guard, you're a medical doctor in a state facility, you're operating the state driving license printing machine, you have to go to the office for that. But for the 11,000 people who have jobs that could be done anywhere there's a computer and a telephone and a video camera and internet, how many of those actually came to the office? So out of those 11,000, 8,500 worked from home 5 days a week. 500 who could have worked from home came to the office 5 days a week. It's interesting. And then there's 2,000 who did a bit of both. But when we know where they live, because we send them paychecks, and we know the address of the building that has the door badge reader, we can actually tell the distance they drove. And we know they drove because the buildings don't have public transit nearby and people don't live near convenient public transit locations. So we can calculate the carbon footprint. And that amount of people working from home and not commuting reduces the carbon emissions for employees of these organizations, employees of the state of California. They've reduced their emissions by 583 metric tons in a week. That's the same, just to get scale, if you fly a plane San Francisco, DC nonstop, land it, turn around, fly back to San Francisco nonstop, that's 1.1 metric tons. So you can do 530 round trip flights a week is the same emissions that you just saved. Or to put it another way, if you said everyone must come into the office, you're going to be creating this much emissions. This has been going on since before COVID. This is in the good news, things we can change category. Since COVID, a couple of things. One is humans are social. We actually like other contact. There is a real drive for people to want to actually make human contact with others. One of the things you used to do when you went to the office, you would say hello to your coworkers. The ones you were friendly with, you would talk longer with. The ones you were not so friendly with, you just kind of be civil with and move along. But you actually crave the social contact. We don't handle isolation well. And a common push here is that when you consider where you spend your day, most people before COVID spent the majority of their waking day with their coworkers, not with their family. You spend breakfast, maybe dinner, and then fall asleep with your family, but you spend most of the waking day with your coworkers. You suddenly lose all of that when the offices are closed and you got COVID and you're trying to figure out how to get work done. A lot of the people who are asking to go back to the office are wanting to go back to life before COVID, where they can socialize with people that they used to work with. We don't have a time machine. Some factors we have to bring in here. We've spent decades putting more and more humans into less and less space. How do you architect floor plans to open plan, reduced foot traffic space, reduce common space, reduce the real estate cost of having offices by fitting more and more humans per square foot? That's not so great with an airborne pandemic. So how do you change that? As item one. Item two is in the middle here. This is from the patient zero case where a person flew from Wuhan into Hong Kong, went straight to a restaurant. That's the patient zero is the yellow A1. They actually had COVID, did not know it, and no one else in Hong Kong had COVID yet. They came here, had lunch with some friends at table A. They did not talk to people on any other table. And at the end of the lunch, the red circle people at table A, B, and C all got COVID. Interesting, the people at D, E, and F did not get COVID. After some research, the result is there was an air conditioner blowing air on the wall over on the right. It was blowing air across tables A, B, and C. It was not blowing air across D, E, F. This is a problem if you have centralized airflow and open plan buildings that have central air. So figuring this out is a problem. Wait times on elevators. How many people can you fit into an elevator? How long does it take you to get from the lobby to your floor? If you change a 12-person elevator to have a maximum occupancy of 4 people, that means you have to wait in the lobby longer for an elevator. In some buildings, this is already being calculated to go up into hours of wait time just to get up and hours of wait time to get back. In that case, why bother? And that's assuming you got to the lobby of your building by magic, right? So whether you drive, we're already seeing traffic patterns up, but still public transit usage is down. So how people get to a building is still a problem as well. So the offices are going to be very, very different, whatever offices do open. I mentioned it here briefly, the commute, how you get to the building is going to be different as well. What happens with childcare in schools? That's also a question mark. How do you handle schools that close and reopen and close again? What does that mean for the adults that are trying to get work done but can't go to work today because of a school closure? And keep in mind that before COVID, the requirement to commute was actually a barrier for people who wanted jobs. So people who have the right skills, are unemployed, are seeking a job, and employers who are trying to hire people, there are people who will not apply for your job no matter how much you want them to apply because they can't get to your office and back twice a day. I challenge anyone here to put on a blindfold and leave their house and try and get to an office and back safely with somebody else keeping an eye out for them. It's not an easy project. Same if you're on crutches or in a wheelchair. Same if you're a single parent and you have to figure out caregiving. So this is a real thing. 43% of working mothers leave the workforce when they have children. There's 74% of people with long-term disability who just are long-term unemployed. And this is a real problem. We'll come to this in a second. And the other one is, keep in mind, some work is location specific. So the person who's operating the state driving license printing machine, you can actually make their job safer by having fewer other humans nearby who might actually have COVID. So the conversation about who do we go back to the office, that's really kind of a, it's not a straightforward one. It's a shades of gray question here. I'd like to encourage people to think about who must be in the office, and then who usually was in the office but doesn't actually have to be there. Those are very different categories of people, and that's a thing you want to be clear on. And I want to call out specifically, the word hybrid is very popular these days. People say, oh, we're going to do a hybrid workforce. So we'll have some people in the office and some, or you can come in some days and not others. Be very careful here. Hybrid is the more advanced management case. In a hybrid scenario, what you're saying is like some people come in on Mondays, some come in on Tuesdays, whatever. It is very possible for people, it's very, very easy for people to say, oh, my boss goes in on Tuesdays, I'll go in on Tuesdays because now I get seen by my boss. Now the boss can easily just start noticing the people that they see on Tuesday, and they will be completely oblivious to the people who come in on Monday or Wednesday. Now you start favoring cool new projects to the people you see, and you create this first class, second class problem. This is a real trap, and you want to be careful of this. So if you're getting into a hybrid model, you want to anticipate and head this off. There's a bunch of things we'll talk about. The other thing I'll say is be very careful of making premature announcements. Like if you say, we're going to go back to the office on the 1st of October, and then something comes up and you say, well, we're going to go back to the office on the 1st of November, you keep having to restate new announcements. And every time you do this, people will believe the new announcement less. So instead, phrase it as a factual thing. We will not be going back to the office before September 30th. After that, we don't know. Come September 30th, you can truthfully say now, we will not be going back to the office before October 30th. But you've been true consistently all the way. Be careful of the words. Also, don't say return to work or return to workplace, because these come with the hidden bias that says all the things that people have been doing to keep the wheels turning for the last 18 months was not work. People have been working very hard for the last year and a half. So don't say return to work. And people have been working from home. So don't say that that's not the place that they've been working and that only in the office does it count as work. If you're using these words, watch and check yourself on your internal bias here. If you want to say things like return to facility, return to office, that's fine. But do not say return to work. We also don't know what's going on with COVID variations. Delta is all over the news now. Right now, there's another variation, Mu, that's coming up. I'm not a doctor, so I'm skipping past all that. But know that this is an ongoing thing and the situation is changing. If you require people to come back to an office, you will have to come up with policies to match. Are you requiring vaccines? Will you refuse people entry who do not have a vaccine? What will you say to an employee who refuses to get a vaccine for whatever reason? What do you say to somebody who has a medical condition that's got nothing to do with COVID? They've just had an organ transplant, they're doing chemotherapy for cancer, and they're now required to come to the office and sit beside somebody who refuses a vaccine. These are real hard legal and policy questions that you will need to have answers for in writing before people can come back to an office, if you require people to come back to the office. So consider this when you're making the, I want to go back to life before COVID. Be careful that you need to answer questions like this. You'll also need to update your policy. Like, what do you do for people who have kids go to school and you need to deal with school closures and daycare closures? Are you going to force people to take vacation because they're now working from home? Are you going to treat working from home during these kind of events as just a normal workday? These are all policy questions you need to sort out in advance. Otherwise, it gets really complicated and messy. Reality, if you tell people that they have to come back to the office, we're already seeing a really large drop out of the workforce where females are doing more of the work at home and not able to keep up with work and also dealing with things like homeschooling and house work around the house. This would be much worse if everyone was required to come to an office. I'm skipping past the other social commentary about that too. But in private industry, the companies have been closing offices left, right, and center. The three I'm going to point out here, Twitter was, I think, the first one to announce that everyone could permanently work from home. This was early in March of 2020. Pinterest also, and I think it was in August of 2020, they got the keys to a brand new building that had just finished renovation and a build out as their new headquarters. And it was, in their opinion, better business sense to pay the $89 million cancellation fee, not take the keys for the shiny new building from the developer and walk away. Salesforce has a very large building here in San Francisco, and they canceled their lease on what was going to be the second building. There's some back and forth about what's happening with that planned building, the second building now, but Salesforce has gone full-time remote as well. So watch this. The other one is things about going back to the office. We did an experiment where we were trying to hire for a particular position in Sacramento, and part of hiring for that position in Sacramento, we put up a job posting. Here's some technical skills. Here's some citizenship background check, pay, salary, years of experience. All of this was identical. We did 2 job postings. And the only difference between the 2 job postings, one said, must come to this building in Sacramento 5 days a week. And the other one said, must reside in California and be willing to come to Sacramento once a month. That was the only difference. We posted them the same time, took them down the same time, went through the candidates. For the one that said come to the Sacramento office 5 days a week, we had 52 applicants, many of whom we'd seen before, who were still not qualified. Nobody passed the interviews. For the must reside in California and be willing to come to Sacramento once a month, we had 761 applicants. We hired the person we wanted. We hired 4 others as well, opportunistically. So make sure when you're posting jobs, be clear about what you're looking for and be aware of this is a huge hiring advantage for you. So we wanted people who are in California for legal and jurisdiction reasons around the nature of the work. So you can put that in the job description. And make sure you say it in the description. Don't just put it in the banner text somewhere around the website, because if your job posting gets shared elsewhere, that wrapper text gets lost. So put it in there and specifically put things like remote welcome. So people know it's not something they have to negotiate for when they are trying to hopefully get this job that they want, but they don't feel they've got enough power to negotiate with the boss about taking this new thing and being distributed. So put it in the job description up front. Buenos Aires is doing an interesting thing where they've actually been able to improve the hiring, specifically diversity of the hiring in Buenos Aires city government by focusing on working from home. And that's a pretty new project. It's still very cool. So these are all things that you can keep in mind as we're going along. These are why I think this change is actually a long-term change for the better. So I'm going to get into a couple of things here. Some mechanical things. We have, a lot of tools that we use. I wanted to talk and check on environments that are outside of the workspace, outside of a business office space. So it's not just a tech space, it's not just accounting. So I wanted something that was actually totally different. And how do they talk to each other and communicate with each other? And so the example I found was actually in the military. There's a few different examples, but a quick one I'll show here. This picture was taken 100 years ago. And this is in World War I in Europe. And so this is the telephone, literally a field telephone with a telephone wire, and someone is running around patching up telephone wires in a battlefield. But this allows groups, soldiers in one place, to talk by phone to soldiers in another place and coordinate their work. Mechanically, a huge, amazing increase in their ability to work together and talk to each other, but also very fragile. You know, you've got telephone wires that are getting broken all the time in a war zone. 30 years later, it's a radio, very fragile. Another 30 years later, now it's a solid box of electronics with a very easy operator, press a button to talk on a telephone. Another 20 years later, now it fits in your headset, and they can also see at night. All of this happened in the last 100 years and totally changes how they work. And in that same time frame of 100 years, this is what an office looked like 100 years ago in the federal government. And if you replaced out these mechanical calculators with cogs in them and replaced them out with a desktop PC with a monitor, you get a very it looks very familiar. It hasn't changed. Even though the technology has changed, all of this stuff now fits into a laptop or fits into a smartphone. And you can see my pen for scale there. So if all the communication technology has changed, why have we not changed how we work? Well, it turns out a bunch of companies have already asked this question and been doing it. So I work at Civic Actions. They have about 115 or so people. They've never had an office. They've been around since 2006. Works great. We out-retain, we out-hire. Why would we get an office? Why would we limit who we can hire? Mozilla runs Firefox. They are about 800 people spread across the world, about 12 offices. About 40% of people go to any of those 12 offices, and the rest never do. They work from home. Automatic makes WordPress, runs about 25% of all the world's websites. They've got an office for a while, and they closed it because nobody went there. But they started with no office, and they still have no office. And all of these companies have been doing this for years and decades. They are out competing. They're using the tools that are available today, and they're out competing their other people in the marketplace. It is important to note that this is not a technical problem. This is a human leadership problem. How you lead matters. So let's take a couple of tactical things. Excuse me. So let's take a couple of tactical things. First one is meetings. Common complaint is, oh, I have way too many meetings. Zoom fatigue is now a phrase that people use. It's important to note that you had a lot of meetings in offices too. And so what was going on was you have a bunch of people come into a meeting room, you have a meeting, then you leave, you walk down the corridor, you haven't all agreed to what was decided in the meeting. So as you're walking down the corridor, you're still talking about the things that were going on in the last meeting. Now, a subset of people will meet and talk about different things, and you'll make a decision about some parts, but you didn't include everyone. So now you have another meeting about that last meeting. Then you have a further meeting because person one is not sure to be agreed to Friday or Monday, and you went around to somebody's desk, but they're not there. Now you have another meeting. All of that, when you're suddenly forced online, means now you have to have Zoom calls for every one of these, or Microsoft Team calls for every one of these. And now you're scheduling meetings about the last meeting that you'd scheduled. Now you got meetings all day long. No wonder you have Zoom fatigue. You took everything that you were doing very inefficiently in an office and you diligently recreated it just as inefficiently online. That's really draining. So an experiment I'd ask people to do is like make for the next 2 weeks, this week and next week, make your calendar obsessively accurate. Like actually update calendar invites all the time. If someone invites you to a meeting and the meeting starts 20 minutes late, update the calendar invite. If the meeting runs a half an hour long, update the calendar invite at the end. If a meeting gets canceled, delete it. If you end up spending time working on something, you have an impromptu conversation with somebody and you're brainstorming something, add that as a calendar invite. Add a little thing for lunch. Add a thing for focus work. If you focus on writing this complicated budget proposal or a policy statement, block that as if it was a meeting. And what I want you to do then after 2 weeks is look back at your calendar and see where exactly does your time go. And what a lot of people, every time I've done this experiment with people, they find they spend more than half their time in status meetings. Often over 70%. That's a lot of time to have a lot of people sitting there talking about what's going on and retelling the story of what's going on with this project rather than organizing. I'm going to talk about how you organize single source of truth in a minute. You should actually be spending more time working on the things you're supposed to be working on. Occasionally having meetings where you're doing decision making, like do we hire this candidate? Do we go ahead with this policy decision? Brainstorming around a hard problem where you need people to innovate with them. That's a thing where you want to meet. And also making social contact with coworkers. So you actually remember you like each other. And the problem is if you spend so much time in status meetings, the last thing you want to do is get on another Zoom call or another Teams call with anybody to talk about anything. So you start doing things like losing all social contact, trying to make decisions without actually asking everybody, or just trying to like send an email thinking that's faster. And then you get into an email thread that actually takes longer than what would have been a 5-minute video call. So because of the amount of time you spend in status meetings, things can go sideways. So ask yourself this often, like, do I need a status meeting to know, do I need to be at this status meeting? If you're running a meeting, tactically, try this. Nobody remembers when a meeting starts late, but they do remember when meetings end late. So change your calendar reminder, join the video call early, 10 minutes early, when your 10-minute reminder goes off. You can minimize the window and you can go back to clearing out your inbox. You're there, your hardware setup is all working. And now when other people join, you can say, hi, Manisha, how you doing? And she say, oh, good, yeah. You being friendly, which is nice. You're also doing an audio video check. She can see me, I can see her, I can hear her, she can hear me. That's important. And then keep saying, we're going to start after 3 minutes. Now, you're not saying we're going to start in a few minutes, or we're going to start soon, or we're going to start when everyone gets here. That's not correct. That's not valid. That makes people think that the meeting can start at any second. You want to say, start after 3 minutes. You could say, I experimented with different durations, but 3 seems to work well. This lets people have what's called liminal time, transition time. If you just came out of another meeting and you jump straight into this meeting, in an office, what you do is you leave a meeting room, walk down the corridor, and walk into another meeting room. You have time as you do this to mentally change gears out of the last meeting and mentally get ready for the next meeting. If you're on a video call and you click leave meeting, click join meeting, that's an instant jump and your brain can't catch up with you as fast. You're still thinking about the last thing, you're still not prepared. You haven't had a chance to go and process down like that. Hearing that it's going to be 3 minutes lets you do that processing. If they say we're going to start at any second, it feels like you're a runner at the starting blocks of a race and you're just waiting for someone to say, okay, let's go. So you can't actually relax. And then do start after 3 minutes. And I use the phrase out of respect for those who are punctual, because you want to encourage people to be on time. And then meetings will start on time. Also, who needs to be at it? My classic case here was at a meeting of about 20 people, and I realized this was taking a long time. And if you're senior enough and you invite everybody, they'll all come. And then at some point, they'll all feel the need to say something to prove that they're actually a contributing member of the team. And if that's 20 people, there's 20 minutes of just people saying, yes, I'm here and I agree with what the last person said. Okay, well, that's 20 minutes out of an hour-long meeting. So I started to try and just cut people out. I was like, okay, well, actually, this meeting is for these 3 people. You 17 people don't need to be here. Uninvite. And what I found was that people got very upset about being left out of meetings. They felt that they're not valued. They felt they're being sidelined. They felt things were being said or done about them or was being decided behind closed doors elsewhere. And they somehow felt insecure about this and unsafe. So I changed the event. And so it's now you 3 are required and you 17 are optional, welcome if curious. If you show up, there's nothing really for you to do, but you're welcome if you want to. If you don't show up because you have anything else to do that you think is more important or a better use of time, that's totally great and fine. And I, as the boss, as the meeting owner, as the meeting inviter, signal that it's okay for you to no show and that it's not a problem. At first, people still show up. After a couple of weeks of this, people start to drift out, and you'll see this welcome if curious group get much, much smaller, or maybe they'll come for one specific thing that they see is coming up. But often this will shrink down pretty fast over a few weeks. That takes down time on the meetings. I wasn't able, just by itself, this was not enough to get me to 30 minutes, but it got me close. And that's what I was aiming for. And if you can leave gaps between meetings, that's great, because then you can actually have a chance to check up on some work yourself, but that depends on your environment. Ideal structure I found that works well long-term for physically distributed is you want to have an all team, all group check-in. You could, at the beginning of a crisis, and if things are still hot and heavy in your area, maybe you do it daily. But as things settle down, you move that down to being 2 days a week and then 1 day a week. We at least do it once a week. And everyone can at least just say hello to each other. There's the social contact. Are the things they're blocked on or what are they working on? And it is a good place for leadership to talk about any kind of crisis development stuff that's going on. Any kind of crisis communications essentials 101, right? It's like, make sure everyone hears the same story about what's going on with the office plan, what's going on with people who are sick, what's going on with people who are out or who's joining or leaving the company. This is important for cutting down on rumors. This is important for cutting down on crossed wires and misunderstandings. So these are essential. The other one is everyone who directly reports to you, one-on-one every week. If you do these every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, stuff will come up in between, and either they'll find someone else to talk to, or they'll want an impromptu meeting for that important topic. So you find yourself with a lot of ad hoc meetings. If you do it every week, keep it very short, 30 minutes. But what you're doing is you cut down on the need for ad hoc meetings and find a way to make time for a cup of coffee. When you're in an office, you still have time to go walk down, get a cup of coffee and come back. It's only 5 minutes. Everyone has time for at least one coffee during the day. So try next time you're going to take a break in whatever your group chat program is, say, I'm taking a coffee, who wants to hang out for 5 minutes? Maybe the answer is nobody. Maybe the answer is 3 people. Do it, have a coffee, end it quickly after 5 minutes, go back to work. But you've just said hi. That's really important. You can always find time for at least one of those a day, maybe every second day, but focus and make that a priority. Depending on the situation, if you can, I encourage doing weekly socials as well, usually Friday afternoons or late Thursdays. Again, the timing depends on what's going on with the humans. People will not want to do this if they have 40 hours of status meetings. But it's important because it's how people actually get to remember they like each other as coworkers. So focus on eliminating status meetings down so you can make time and headspace for these. I'm not hearing any interrupts, so I'm going to keep going here. Video etiquette. There's a lot of products out there. I've used all of these in different companies over the time. The answer in terms of productivity and ease of use at this time in 2021, it's Zoom. I've used it with people who've never used it before. I've used it on mobile devices. I've used it with hundreds of unique connections calling into the same call at the one time. They've all worked flawlessly first time. I've never seen anything else work as well. And then the video quality is good. The audio quality is good. And it's really cheap. In the future, there might be something else. There has been in the past. So your job, if you're leading and you're communicating with different people, your job is to always be on top of what are the communication tools available, what's the best tools to use, and know how to use them. Really know how to use them. Like, you would not hire somebody whose job was in finance if they did not know how to use Excel, right? If they insisted on using pencil and paper and a calculator, you're like, no, you got to use Excel. You got to learn how to do Excel. So the same is true for leading and communicating. You need to use the tools and you need to know how to use them. Speaking of how to use them, like this call is like on standard internet with consumer grade electronics here. There's nothing high speed, fancy, crazy in terms of money here. But it's amazing how many people will get some basic camera framing wrong. So some camera tips to look for. First, make sure you're actually visible on camera. If the camera is pointed up and you didn't even notice that your face is not on the camera, that's a problem. Like, what we're looking for here is for people to be able to see your facial expression. We've seen with centuries of experience as humans learning emotions and reading emotions off of other people's faces. We can tell grumpy eyebrows, question mark eyebrows, sad face, smiley face really quickly. And you lose that if you're not on camera. So if someone refuses to turn on the camera, or someone who's like off camera because they're not even aware that the camera is like here, you can't tell what the expressions are. So check your rearview mirror. If you're doing a call from a bedroom, a lot of people are, look in the rearview mirror, is the background professional? And, you know, for example, if the bed is visible, then at least make the bed. If you have dirty laundry that's visible, put the laundry in the laundry basket, or at least move it off camera. So just simple straightening up the background to make it look professional. It doesn't have to be a television studio, but it does have to be at least somewhat professional enough to represent you. You don't want to sit in environments where other people are walking around in the background. It's not fair on them. They don't know they're on camera, and they're very distracting to the people you're meeting with. Don't sit in front of a window where you're totally backlit. That's the witness protection program look. You lose all facial expressions. You can't tell what's going on. And actually, it encourages distrust. Same for this kind of split Alfred Hitchcock black and white movie, light dark effect. You don't quite know what's going on here. This is an odd one. And the last example here is pretty common, where people in offices will spend a bunch of money on electronics on a wall, which will give you this image. You can clearly see the big table. You can clearly see the backs of the chairs that no one wants to sit in because the back is to the camera. But you cannot see any of the facial expressions of all the little bobbleheads around the table. And the table usually is where you put the microphone, and the table is a great acoustic amplifier. So any sounds on the table, people tapping a finger, typing on a laptop, tapping a pen, will be picked up very, very clearly by the microphone, much louder than any people talking. And if two people start talking, forget it. So this is a scenario where you actually spend money to make a worse experience. And my recommendation is don't. Instead, look in the rearview mirror before you start a call and make sure your face is lit up uniformly. Make sure the background is somewhat calm and somewhat bland and boring. And there's no distractions, there's no people walking by, there's no crowded anything else. What this lets you do is lets you do things like, now I can see facial expressions. I can see happy, sad, grumpy, bored, not quite sure, puzzled. So I can stop and say, hey, you know, Manisha, I see you're asking a question here. What does that mean? Do you have a question here? That's because of the facial cues. It also lets you do things like speed up calls. Someone says blah 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 blah. Here's the thing we were planning to do. Does everyone think this idea is okay for this project? And now usually what happens in an audio only world is everyone realizes you've stopped speaking. Everyone goes and hits the unmute. Everyone starts to talk at the same time. Now you've got this weird little human etiquette thing of who stops talking and who talks over who, usually depending on rank and ego or something like that. And this takes time. Whereas you could just do thumbs up. And all of you can do thumbs up at the same time. The thumbs up only works if you're on camera. You could say, hey, I have a question. Again, that's on camera. There's other ways you can do things like as well. The other cues, if someone's talking and they're muted and they don't know they're muted, or they don't know the audio is broken, so you know they have an audio problem, but they don't tell them they have audio problems because they may not hear you telling them. Everyone else will hear you telling them that they have an audio problem, but that's not helpful. Show them, like putting your hand up like this is a way to show people to stop. There's something wrong, audio problem. And this hand cues on camera took 10 to 15 minutes off of every 60-minute call. Just these cues. This combined with the welcome if curious and the who's required versus welcome and curious optional invite thing, these two together made all of these hour-long calls I was doing change into 30-minute, 25-minute calls. Then we started doing things like tidying up the agenda and talking about that. That made them go faster. But just these mechanical things made calls go faster. And the other one is,
John,
yes?
there is a question that says some employees never turn on their camera. Is it appropriate to ask them to turn on their camera?
Yeah, you can. It depends on the setting if you know the person or not. And so there's some tricky things here. So first of all, some people may feel they don't have a professional looking setting behind them. And you don't have to have a movie studio setting. You can just sit into a corner of a kitchen or into a corner of a spare bedroom with a bland piece of wall behind you. That's perfectly good. What often comes up is people who are not wanting to turn on their camera are actually working on something else because they're not quite sure why they're in this meeting. And really, if you did that whole welcome if curious optional thing, they would have not attended in the first place if somebody else would send out the notes afterwards. But they're there doing something else and they're not paying attention to your call. And so they don't want to be on camera visibly working on something else. Those are probably the most, the strongest reasons that people don't turn on cameras. The other one is there is a social thing as well, and this comes up actually in open plan spaces. Studies done show females in an open plan space feel that they're being looked at or watched more than males. So they're very conscious of their image and posture and sitting in an open plan office. And this carries over onto video as well. And having an expectation that says nobody's expected to be a TV star, and I'm not, and like you can just have a decent and professional looking, you don't have to go the full game to being dressed up for a movie shoot, but just being professional is easy. Those would be the things I would, and just kind of be okay with that. That's where those would be the three answers I give to that. And also, if you get people saying that they consistently don't want to be on video, I would start meeting them like this is a recurring meeting. I'd meet them individually and make sure they understand, like, look, this is making meetings faster. We'll start timing the meetings, do experiments. Like I did this over the course of a couple of years of research and experimenting with real live humans and real live companies. And I found every time I explained that the reason we want to do this is because of these nonverbal cues, the being able to comment visually about audio problems, things like that. It made people realize the mechanical importance of camera. And then that helped shift the conversation. And you need to, as a leader, you need to lead by example. You're always on camera, period. And look for allies. Hopefully that answered the question. I'll keep going. The last thing I'll say is be careful of green screens or blur screens. This can feel like a good, easy trick to just sort of click the button and make the background look like you're floating in space or you're sitting with a branded logo of your organization. The catch is this is basically a computer imaging game where you go through looking at your image of your room and your person, and then replace the background, identify where is the human and replace the background with some other image. That's fine if you sit totally still, don't move, and the clothes you're wearing and the color of your skin in no way match the background. As soon as you start moving, as soon as you start wearing clothing that has some of the same colors as what's in the background, if you've got hair, which I don't, and your hair is the color of something, you'll get weird cropping effects going on. And you hold up your hand to show something and maybe you suddenly lose all your fingers and then your fingers come back again, or just one of them. It's really distracting. It's one problem. And second problem is it comes back to the trust thing. It makes it look like you're trying to hide something. This actually erodes trust. Instead, find a chair, sit in a corner somewhere where the background is just a bland wall. Or maybe in a corner where you have like a bookshelf or something. But move it around, make it a real background, but just make it not interesting, not distracting. You want to focus on the humans in the meeting, not about being an interior decorator. And the problem with green screens is that they're totally distracting and they actually erode trust. So watch for this, unless you happen to be a trained TV professional. That's a different game, but I'm not. Culture. I remind you again, working from home long-term, this is not the same as working from home long-term during a pandemic, during a social upheavals. We've been dealing with social issues, dealing with political turmoil, dealing with economic and high unemployment, and dealing with people getting sick and school closing and suddenly learning how to work from home. These are not normal times. Everyone's stressed. New York Times put out an article recently. They did some research, and it was, I think it's 1 in 9 or 1 in 11 Americans know someone who has died of COVID. I personally know some family members who have multiple family members have gone. So this is a high stress time for everybody. You want to watch a few things here. It is possible, if you're really concerned about society and you're concerned about what's going on, you really want to make sure you don't lose your job, so you work very hard at your job. And you don't have a commute. So you get out of bed, you run down and grab your first cup of coffee or tea and sit down at the computer and you start working, and then you keep working. Maybe you grab lunch, dinner, and you keep working after dinner until you fall asleep, and you repeat. Now, you can do this for a short amount of time during big deadlines, but there's people who've been doing this for a year and a half. And this is classic burnout territory. This is predictable burnout. So there's a couple of things that are important to do here. One is find a way to create a fake commute. Maybe you were not aware of it, but when you left your house and went to an office, that commute, whether it's a 30-minute on a bus or whether it's an hour stuck in traffic, was a time when you would sort of mentally change gears from being at home and stop thinking about school for your kid or whatever, and you start thinking about what's that meeting you're going to go to and what am I going to do for later on today. And similarly, when you're transitioning home, traveling home, you're mentally transitioning back to home life. You're thinking about what you're doing for dinner. Are we going out tonight? What's that thing about the plan with the neighbors? Those transition times are important. We talked about liminal time as transitions between meetings during the day. This is another example of this. you need to create a structure in your day. Your commute used to structure your day for you, and that would structure what your social plans were on different nights. Now you have to make your own structure. So create premeditated fake commutes. One person who I thought was great, she used to think for 30 minutes as she drove to work. She's been working from home. She now leaves the house and drives 15 minutes away, turns around and drives 15 minutes home, just so she can actually have a 30-minute commute. She's tried all sorts of other things. That's what works for her. I like walking to the neighborhood coffee shop or finding an excuse to go mail a letter, and I don't mail it in the letterbox nearby. I'll walk to the post office, which is a good 8-10 blocks away, and intentionally go there as a structure for my day. Block out times for doing focus work, like schedule them. Block out times for when you're going to do things with other people and take breaks. There's nothing more annoying about taking lunch. You work all really hard for several hours and then you're like, great, I have 30 minutes for lunch. You get up and you walk away, and 2 minutes into your first bite of lunch, somebody pings you with an urgent question about something. And now you feel guilty because you feel like you just got caught not actually working. Instead, say in the group chat, like, now going for lunch. People will know that when you come back from lunch, you'll see their message. If it's urgent, they can call you, but you get to have lunch. So tell people when you're there, tell people when you're away. And if you're a leader, you lead by example. Model this self-care so everyone else in your organization knows how to do this. Right to disconnect. This is tied to the burnout thing. It's like people will try and make a policy that says, okay, we'll not send emails after 6 o'clock, or we'll have no more meetings on Tuesdays, or, pick a day that's going to be a meeting-free day, whatever. All of these make the assumption that everyone's home life is the same, which is not true. So, if you have a couple of very small kids, probably mid-afternoon to bedtime is probably really chaotic and busy at home. But if you could stop work at 2 or 3 and then resume work after 8 o'clock at night, that's actually really great for you. But if you're being told that actually you must work from 9 to 6, that means that late afternoon up to 6 o'clock, you're trying to get your work done during the peak craziness with the kids. So you've imposed, I don't have kids, so if I made a 9 to 6 rule and said, okay, we're shutting off all systems at 6 o'clock because I want to stop thinking about work, and therefore you will too. Well, I've now made my home life schedule be imposed on your home life schedule, and it doesn't fit. So instead, ask people what works. And be clear, like if I send an email at 11 o'clock at night because I happen to be doing something, I don't expect that you will respond to it at 11:01, but you don't know if it's urgent. So I have to say in my email, hey, Monisha, can you look at this tomorrow when you get in? I need an answer before Friday's presentation to the board. This will actually, she might see it. If she's hanging around looking at email, she might not. If she does see it, she'll see clearly that there's nothing for her to do tonight. We can help her plan for tomorrow morning. And she knows roughly how urgent is it. But that's because I have to tell her. She can't read my mind, right? The other one is the people you're in the house with. You need to coordinate do not disturb cues. So etiquette around being close to each other all the time. This is new for some people. In my case, I'll close the door to this room when I'm on a video call. That's the do not disturb cue that we negotiated here. So sometimes I'll open the door and there's notes outside, like, can you check the mail, or can you, change the laundry over to the dryer, whatever. But there was no risk of accidentally having somebody walk in and disturb the video call. But you have to negotiate these in advance. So one person I know would sit in the kitchen doing calls, and if they're on video calls, they put up a little kind of plastic flipboard thing that said quiet on video. So people would walk in and be quiet and leave quietly. So you just need to negotiate at home with people there what works. As much as possible, have meals together. You need human contact. encourage this, premeditate this. Socially, premeditate social time together. I encourage not watching TV, because if you've been looking at screens all day, either typing or on video calls, at least for me, the last thing you want to do is sit down in the evening and watch another screen. So I'll find anything else to do, like taking walks, reading books, talking, playing games. That's fine. And the last one is, remember, you used to have solo time for yourself. When you were driving to work or taking the commute to bus to work, whatever, that was your time for you. And then when you're walking back from the bus stop or walking back from wherever you parked the car, this is you time. That's gone for a lot of people. You hang up the video call, you walk out, and now you're dealing with family and interactions, then you come back into work. So you got work and family, but no solo time. So every now and then I'll go take a walk just by myself for no real good reason, except I want some solo time. And it's not about not liking my partner or not liking other people in the home. It's, I just want time for me. And I would encourage others to do the same with that, and they do. So plan these out. In work, you can also create, I talked about the virtual coffee breaks, but you can also create chat channels that are specifically for not work things. So you can find out who went to see, a nice hike, or who got a new puppy, or who's got new kids, or whatever's going on. So think about these as ways to create human connection. This is what you need for trust. This comes back to the one-on-ones. Every week, same fixed time, you both meet, even if you both think you don't need to. You want to at least say, hi, how are you doing? Chit chat for 5 minutes. If there really is nothing that comes up in your 5 minutes talking to each other, then you could hang up. But make contact, fixed time every week. Block at 30 minutes. If something weird comes up, that could take longer. That can be an exception. You can handle that. But the default is 30 minutes. And the managee sends the agenda of things to talk about. The managee does most of the talking. The manager does most of the listening and answering of questions. If you've ever gone to a meeting where you go in with a lot of important things you want to talk about with your boss, and your boss has just come from somewhere else and they're all upset and they vent, and your entire one-on-one is you listening to the boss vent about an unrelated topic, and you leave that one-on-one and you didn't get to talk about the things that are blocking you. You need to make sure that does not happen. So this structure is important. That frequent human contact is part of it. For group chat scenarios, working as much as possible in shared open channels, not in private DMs. This is where you come to things like ticketing systems and single source of truth. So instead of having one series of emails that say something about a project for Friday, and here's an official project system that says everything's on track for Friday, but a couple of things are orange, but most things are green. And then you have an email thread that says something different. And then you've got someone else on a different email thread with a different status in a different spreadsheet. And you got DMs going around and you got text messages. You don't know what's going on. You don't have a single source of truth. You got lots of contradictory information. And so you have to call a status meeting. So focusing on what is the single source of truth for this project, where is the single source of truth that tells me quickly and easily what's changed since I last looked? What is the accurate current up to the minute status? That is the essential part of how do you get rid of some of these status meetings. And encouraged by talking in the open as much as possible and moving things to tickets like this, this will encourage people to see what each other are doing and trust what each other are doing and working together. The fail case is where one person thinks they're doing the right thing, another person thinks they're doing the right thing, but they're actually different and contradicting each other. And when they both come together later, now one person's upset because they wasted someone else's time, and the other person's upset because their work has been thrown away. This is toxic for team culture and trust. So you want to be careful of this. Back to the office part debate again. Some people want to get out of their house, and there are things you can do around this. Some people want to go back to familiar. I had a fancy office, why can't I work out of it anymore? Some people have been hired in the last 18 months have never been to your office. And given how short people stay in jobs these days, they might leave and have never been in your office. So not everyone has the same opinion about the office. So find out, why do people want to go back to the office? If it's human contact, there's ways to arrange things like here. If it's human contact, who lives in your neighborhood? Maybe you can meet outside in a nearby coffee shop and say hello that way. Just have a casual Friday coffee lunch thing. That might help. You want to think through ways to give contact. For people who want to get out of the house because they have a small place and it's a multi-generational family and they have no place to get reliable, quiet, professional workspace, maybe they can rent a spare bedroom in a friend's house a block away. So they commute to a friend's house and then work out of a spare bedroom in a house somewhere nearby or a neighbor's house. And then they commute back to their home. It sounds silly to commute to another person's house. Working from home doesn't mean working from your home. It just means working not in the office. There's been some places I've seen where storefronts have closed and then they let people sit in different places around the closed store to work. So the scenarios we can think about this and find ways to make it workable. But asking what people need and what people want is the root important part here. We mentioned it briefly, but if you're saying everyone must come back to the office, you'll need to have clearly written out policies for all of these kind of tricky topics. And that's non-trivial, and think carefully. If you're going to do hybrid, you want to also think carefully. You want to watch out for this management behavior where you bias towards better treatment of the people you see. So watch for that. And I really like the encouraging people to meet right away and just go meet someone for lunch or coffee nearby. I think that's really helpful. Why have everyone commute down to where the office is and then go for a coffee near the office if it turns out you both live within 5-minute or 20-minute drive of each other? A good mindset here. An organization is a group of humans working on a common goal. An organization is not a building. Which leads to this last big section here. I've worked in organizations that had to deal with every one of these. COVID's the latest. I'm sure there's going to be other disasters at some point. But I say this to say COVID is bad and it's global and it's a pandemic. It is not the only major large-scale disaster running around that we have to pay attention to. Some examples: New York, Hurricane Sandy. Yes, homes and businesses got damaged and some people got injured and died. I'm not trying to belittle that. But after it was over, which was relatively quick, there was a lot of people stuck at home and there was a lot of offices that were left empty because people could not commute. And people did not know how to work from home already because they used paper files that were sitting on their desk. So they couldn't actually work. That impacted the whole New York City economy for weeks. It doesn't have to be weather. Here's when a bunch of very famous people were all visiting Manhattan at the same time, disrupted a whole bunch of traffic and security operations. The mayor was like, it's easier if people in Manhattan just don't come in. This is California. We're having fires. You want to be careful of fires that, damage houses and offices, of course, but fires that like close down the bridge impact people's ability to get to and from work as well. Even people whose house is fine and whose office is fine. The impact of this is really wide. And you need to know how to already work from home before this hits, not after. Christchurch, I had some people who worked for me who were fine, who were working from here when this hit. We were able to, because everything was very, very crisply organized about who does what and where, we were able to in the middle of a very tricky situation, transition from the person who was leading the project, who was in Christchurch at this time, whose only message out was OMG earthquake. and we transitioned to others. We were able to keep things rolling with the team. And I was able to spend time trying to make contact with him by text messaging to make sure he was okay and what do they need. And they were fine. Some friends needed new homes, and so they had a bunch of people camping in their house for weeks, but everyone was fine. The important part here was we routinely transitioned from people, one role to another person to another person all the time. And so when this really did hit, it was not a surprise. We knew what to do confidently. We trained for it all the time. This is important in government. Engineers build fault-tolerant systems. Civilians need fault-tolerant government. We need government to keep working, even if a government human cannot get into a government building. Has to keep working. We rely on it to keep working. COVID showed us a lot of organizations have what I call short-term disaster planning. They know what to do if there's a fire because you burnt popcorn in the microwave, the fire department came and put it out. You all go home early for the day. You come back there the next day and you work harder to make up for the work you didn't get done yesterday. Or there's a snow day, or there's a sports event that shuts down the freeway, so you close the office for a day. That's short-term disaster planning. Long-term disaster planning is when everyone's told, get out of the office, go home, and don't come back for 6 or 18 months. And this is where COVID showed up organizations that did not have long-term disaster planning. People didn't know how to do one-on-ones. People didn't know that they needed a paper file that was on their desk. People didn't know that they only had desktop computers that they couldn't take home. They're not allowed by policy to take them home. And it's a desktop, which is very inconvenient to carry. So this long-term disaster planning is essential. Being able to keep working during a long-term disaster is what civilians and the population need. This is a Harris poll taken earlier this year. People have been in the poll are saying that companies were more efficient at keeping operations going than government was. We need to be able to handle long-term disaster scenarios. That was an important part of this dashboard. Remember this dashboard I showed at the beginning where we like, why do people come into the office? And why are they coming in 5 days? Even for the people who, never mind why are some people ineligible for telework, but the people who could clearly telework, why did they come in? When we dig into this and do some interviews, it turns out some of the people are coming in because part of their job is to ink on paper, sign approvals on paperwork. So they have to go in, print it out on a government printer, sign it, go walk it to someone else's desk, let them know when they next come into the office, they have stuff that they have to sign, an ink on paper signature. This was actually a really large recurring issue. Turns out, of course, the state of California already bought digital signature technology. They licensed a statewide thing. So we ended up with a mandate policy going out that all forms are required to accept e-signatures by the end of this calendar year. And they're working their way through that, picking the most common forms first and just working their way through. Now, the software already exists. Some of the humans don't know how to use the software, so there's a training issue there. There's also unclear policy statements, like, is this form allowed to be recognized as legally signed if you sign it with a digital signature versus is this form a form that requires ink on paper? So cleaning up policy statements around the documents was also a big thing. This is not a technology thing. The technology was already procured. It was already installed on all the computers. It was already there. It was a policy change. So that's one thing we found from looking at that dashboard. The other thing I want to call out is the DMV. And I say this in a good way. And I know a lot of people like to give the DMV a hard time. The DMV did something very clever, which is they looked at all the reasons that people come into the DMV. And they tried to see how many of those, what's the most common reason that people come into the DMV? How many of these could we move to having online? So people don't need to come in at all. Second part, for those who do need to come in, how do you make sure that they come with a pre-approved, like a pre-verified checklist? Like if you're coming in for a real ID, there's a list of things you have to bring. That's a real thing you have to do in person. Make sure you bring the entire list of things before you come. Don't have someone show up at the DMV for a real ID, have 3 out of 4 forms, get to the front of the line, and then be turned away because they're missing a form. That's a negative experience for everybody. Nobody's happy. But if you can make sure that before they come, they have a scheduled appointment and they have a checklist that shows they've got all the right forms and it's all approved, then the people who still need to come spend less time there, which means you can handle people coming in quickly, which means you can take more people, which means people spend less time there and they view their interaction with government as easier. They like it. They want it to be over so they can get on with the rest of their life. So I really like what the DMV did here in terms of focusing on these. And some of them are non-obvious. I mentioned the Real ID one, but the other one is around how car dealerships who sell a lot of cars, how they deal with all the paperwork as a large stack going into the DMV for here's the 50 cars that we sold and here's the title transfers for 50 cars. Like how do you streamline that process? So picking carefully who needs to come in and working on those and finding ways to modernize one interactive type at a time. And then they updated the DMV, this is from the DMV site. They show right at the top, the front of the page. If you go to DMV, they show you, here's the things, skip the visit, use this thing online. How can you interact and get your thing done without needing to come into the DMV? And this is based on looking at what were the reasons that people came to the DMV, which they have from all the visitor logs and all the activity logs. So just looking at that will answer this. At a federal level, the VA, they did the same thing. They looked at what are the top 20 reasons that people come to the VA website or interact with it, call VA, call into a data center, a call center, call into a physical clinic. Why are they calling the VA? Make those top 20 reasons be the front of the website, be the easiest thing for people to find. Refilling an existing prescription. That's a recurring thing a veteran has to do every X number of weeks. Make it right up top front. And they don't, this is not a static list. They update this every month. They go through and revisit and see what is still the top 20 reasons. So keep doing this. Every time you do this, you have fewer people coming into your office. That means you have better continuity of operations in terms of customer service. And you find out where you can automate, where you should focus your automation work first, because that has the biggest bang for the buck. That's long-term disaster planning. So, takeaways. This is not normal times. Pandemic working from home is not normal working from home. Everyone's getting stressed and burnout, so be nice and be aware of that. Be humane with each other. Speaking of humans, focus on human contact. You got a lot of complicated things to figure out about policies. Do you keep buildings? Do you change leases? Do you consolidate, redo floor plans? Well, sure, but you can start arranging to meet people for coffee outside. Go have lunch with people if you can, make the human contact. The technology has been working for decades. This is a human leadership problem. You need to lead by example. You can't just make a fancy announcement and then go back to doing things the way you did before. You have to lead by example here. In other industries, changing how you communicate has totally revolutionized how they operate. And you can do it too. And you might at scale. This can quickly help save the world and address hiring and retention problems. And keep in mind long-term disaster planning. This is what you need to do. We need long-term disaster planning. We need resilient government. There you go.
John, before we ask people to throw in some of the questions in the chat. We actually had a lot of chatter going on, and this has been just a really great opportunity for people to connect and also share some of their ideas. That people who are talking about taking their dog for a walk so they can have that alone time or that commute time. So this has really spurred, a lot of thoughts. And so that's really, really great. One question that I'd like to bring to your attention, someone had asked, how do we get past tech tool wars? And I know that really is a thing. There's so many things that are being offered. People are aware and have been using certain tools. And so now it's just really deciding on which tools to use. Do you have a suggestion for that?
I think so first of all, there's a lot of like my toy is better than your toy arguments. So like there's a lot of personal bias things here. So you want to be careful. And I'm going to be, I know this is a recorded call and I am not a sales vendor for any particular product. So giant disclaimer. So I'm actually not going to mention any names other than the one placement I did in the middle, and I don't work for them. I do not have any shares with them, etc. That's my disclaimer speech. I think a good way to resolve a lot of these discussions is asking first, do the tools work? A common thing that people I've seen do is like, oh, we need this tool, we need a new tool. And so you have tool number one, like let's pick a chat tool or an email documents sharing tool, whatever. Some people like it, some people don't. So somebody else goes and gets another tool, like another video product, for example. Now, some people are using the old video tool. Some people are using the new video tool. What you didn't do was actually do the hard work of saying, well, if we're moving from, if tool one is not working and we want to get tool number two, we need to get tool number two, it has to work, and then we need to turn off tool number one. So the act of removing obsolete tools is not at all cool and sexy work. It's very much in the weeds. But the problem is if you don't remove it, some people will use one, some people use the other, and now you've got this real mess. And if you repeat this game for maybe 5 or 10 years, now you have a half a dozen different tools, and nobody really knows which one's the right one, and nobody knows how to find anything anyway. So one is remove obsolete tools. I'd absolutely focus on that. If we're saying this tool isn't working, we're going to turn it off. No one's using this anymore. Uninstall it. Item two is be weirdly specific about what you want the tool to do. What's the definition of success for the tool? So to take a video tool example, my definition of success for a video tool is if I'm sitting typing away at my computer and I have this idea and I want to talk to Manisha about this. I think Manisha's got it. So I send you a message in chat. Hey, Manisha, got a second? Are you free? I've got this random question. It's not urgent. Oh yeah, I happen to be free now. Sure. Okay, hey, can you hop on a quick video call? Yes, I can. Okay. Click the stopwatch. Click, send you a link to join the video call. And then I join the video call. You get the link, you join the video call. How you doing? Can you hear me? Yeah, I can see you. Hi, hi. Click, stop the stopwatch. How long did it take to get from, I have this idea I want to talk to you about, to we're now both on a working video call talking through the idea. I still managed to keep the idea in my head that I want to brainstorm with you. If this is a few seconds, if this is 1, 2, 3, 5 seconds, I'm okay. If this is, and I don't want to mention another product name, but there's another product that's very popular in government. It's a video tool, and like just getting into it for a pre-scheduled meeting, I always feel like I've somehow managed to ace my exam for graduation, because the act of logging in, finding the link, joining on the, clicking on the link, starting, waiting for software to join and start, and then finding out I have to put in extra passwords and codes. And then it suddenly doesn't find the hardware right and I have to fiddle with settings. It can take me 5 to 10 minutes for a pre-scheduled meeting. And if I'm trying to have this impromptu brainstorming idea and I want to talk this out with you, that tool has actually made, I've forgotten what I wanted to talk to you about by the time I made it get through the hoops. So for me, a video tool has to consistently always work, always find the hardware and go from I have an idea to we're talking in a few seconds. If it doesn't, the tool is not working, and there are plenty of other consumer grade tools out there that will work, and you should replace it. But I use that example to say, know what you're trying to buy the tool for, and then be clear about, does it actually work? And remove it if it doesn't. Was that the...
Okay, so yeah, I I got your hand gesture.
Right.
We have another question, and
Sure, yeah.
it's actually two questions, but I think they do go together.
Okay.
So the first question had asked, is anyone, it's a hiring question. It says, is anyone including skills and experience working with distributed teams in their job posting? And then there was a second question from the same person who asked, IBM used distributed teams to make people invisible, which also made it easier to let people go. There is a real fear many workers experience that extends beyond, it says FOMO, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that's.
Fear of missing out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does being distributed mean you are easier to replace?
So this comes, that's why I spend so much of the time on this about culture and trust. If you, and to take pretty bad scenarios, you could outsource. If you go back to some time in the 90s, when people were trying to learn how to do this, companies are like, oh, we're going to save money by offshoring a bunch of work to pick another country somewhere else in the world. And then in that other country, they will go hire a company and hire people there at a lower salary. And so they're saving payroll costs. And then they put zero effort into making contact and getting to know these humans on the other side. Now you got people who are working 12-hour time zone away from you, and you don't know their names. You don't know what's going on in their family life. You don't know about social and civil unrest situations going on in their country. You sort of don't care. I want my thing done by this time. Everyone gets very defensive. You get contractors. You end up starting to spend a lot of time flying back and forth to try and make a connection, because there's no trust. And they don't trust you as much as you don't trust them. And you end up writing up lawyer contracts around response times and SLAs and escalations, and it still doesn't work. And a lot of people will jump to that in their mind when they think remote work or distributed work or virtual work or telework, like, oh my God, we're all going to offshore and go to. This is a common fear. The reason I think it's important to talk with each other is you need to know who each other are as humans. That human contact, that's what you did in an office. That's what you do when you work online and you get to know each other. And so I can't just have like a 30-minute call with you and then be like, oh yeah, me and Manisha, we're best buddies. We go out and we talk to each other all the time. Sheena and I each know how each other thinks. We only barely got to meet each other. So far, a series of positive interactions, but it's still relatively new. If you've been working like this and focusing on the recurring human contact for weeks and months and years, like you did in an office, you made contact with people in an office every day. Put the same premeditated time into doing it when you're online. Then you start getting things like you build trust over time. If you don't have trust of the other person, then you start feeling like, well, when they said, I have an idea, and you said, oh, really? And I'm like, I don't know, is she questioning the validity of my idea? Is she thinks it's an obvious no-brainer? Does she think I'm an idiot? Is she going to take my idea and go run around and try and stab me in the back by getting someone else to think it was her idea? Like all of these things, because I don't have trust. And so that focus on the human contact, recurring, when it's just about coffee or pets or dogs or whatever you want to talk about, and then you get to know each other when you're more relaxed, which means if we're in a stressful meeting, I already know what relaxed Manisha looks like. So I can now see that this image is different. So Manisha's not relaxed. So how are you doing? Is this okay? Is it, and being sensitive to that is an important aspect of this. And you have to just intentionally make time for it. The second part of the fear of missing out, I went through it on the slides earlier, and when I talk about working in the open as much as possible, if you do things in direct messaging or private messaging to each other, then other people get left out. That's one problem. And there's miscommunication, the erosion of trust, and a bunch of badness. The worst problem is that even if people are not being left out, they start to fear that they might be left out. And that, even if it's not accurate, if it's not scientifically accurate, it is perception accurate in their mind. And this causes this fear of missing out, which causes an undermining of self-confidence, an undermining of trust. And so you want to bias towards over-communicating in the open. You probably should have done this in an office anyway, but certainly do it when you're doing like working in online scenarios like this. And I think once you have some trust and human contact, this whole thing about it's easier to fire people because you don't see them. It's never easy to fire somebody. It's exciting and scary when you hire people. And over time, distributed organizations have higher retention rates. Like people stay longer, people get to know each other longer, and then becomes a real bond of friends. You don't have to be close friends with everyone, but there's a real bond of humans in working together who, when you do finally get to meet every 6 months or 12 months or whatever is going on, it's really weird because you meet someone for the first time in real life and you're like, oh my God, you're so short, or you're so tall. I never knew that I know you so well. I feel like I should be able to give you a hug, but we've never met before. So maybe I don't give you a hug. Like, I don't know. There's all these weird social human contact things that come out. But the emotional connection between the humans is really, really strong, and retention is higher.
So interesting. One of the things that you were talking about, you provided some tips for us on how we should be, how we can communicate with each other, and taking into considerations lots of different things, not just the lighting, but sending emails and whatnot. And I know for all of us state workers now, we have lots of people that are contractors and people who are really all over the country. I know personally, I have some staff who are back east. And so taking into consideration that time zone, and is it because they are contractors, they just have to adjust to your California time? Or, I mean, how do you, what do you do for in that sort of situation to make sure that you are being respectful of people's personal time and normal working hours versus the expectation that, I'm here now, and so I need work done now.
Right. So a couple of responses. One is to go back to that example of offshoring with someone very far. And when I was working with that person in New Zealand, for example, I was based in San Francisco, and I think it's a 10-hour, I've forgotten, it's quite a time zone difference. It's a little bit less than Sydney. But we would organize things like, well, the first thing I would do is ask them what's their home life like. So, for example, don't make the assumption, which is what this person did. He assumed that he would be required to work California hours, which would be very, very unfriendly for a New Zealand person in terms of quality of life. An interesting point, when we first hired him, he was actually based in England, in London. And then he later relocated from London to New Zealand. And when he started in London, he assumed he would be asked to work California hours as well. And we made a point of, it's like, well, what's his social personal life going on? So here's the time of the day he doesn't have kids. At first, now he does. So here's the times of day that actually work for him. And then what is it we need in terms of interaction with us? And there were instead of saying, I want you to work California hours, it's like, here's the few meetings that are actually important, because we cut down on all the status meetings. He was expecting to have to join status meetings for 8 hours a day. And I was like, no, like we've got it down to 4 meetings. 2, all team meeting. There was a particular project team meeting for a subset of the team. There was a one-on-one with me. And there was the team social on the Fridays. Those are the 4 meetings. And because there were so few meetings, and because we made a point of making these meetings useful with all the agendas and the hand signals and everyone on camera, he actually wanted to be at the meetings. The social one was actually inconvenient in a New Zealand time zone, but he actually still came to it. So you can adjust how you work in a way that makes it very easy for people in different time zones, and make sure that what they are doing in their life fits. Second part is expectation of response time. If I send a message to you and you're in the East Coast, if we've agreed that you're going to work, I'll pick 7 till 12, just as an example, and then you're going to take a gap to do something with family, and then you're going to work a certain other hours. During that time when you are agreed to be working, I expect really fast response times. And like, hey, Manish, I've got a question. You got a minute? Within a few seconds, I expect an answer back that says, no, I'm busy, or I can see just above you said a thing that said, go and get a coffee, back in 5 minutes. So I know that you're around. You were there just a minute ago. So I know that there's a consistent response. The problem when you don't do these kind of now going for coffee, now back from lunch kind of things, or chatting in public in this public forums with others, I don't see if you're around at all today. So I send you a message and I'm like, I'm not sure if she's there. Manish, are you around? 5 minutes go by. Should I text you? Are you on a phone call? Like, is it urgent? Now you start to question if the other person's really working. And so this constant contact piece is very, very important for that. But then clearly saying, like, now I'm leaving, I'll be back in a few hours, and everyone knows when you go. And if you organize it well, and it depends on the nature of your work, you can then end up with, I have reliable coverage when I am taking lunch. I know someone else is starting their day and they're fully awake and they can take care of anything that comes up while I'm taking lunch. So I can happily stop. But you need to coordinate this.
I'm not seeing any additional questions, but I think I do want to, oh wait, something just popped up. Let me just see, take a quick look.
Oh, I just realized there's tons of chat here.
There is, like I said, this has been really great. I think this is really kind of, hit a nerve with some folks. And
Yeah.
A couple of the things that I have seen kind of in the back and forth, they weren't actual questions, but just sort of people's reaction to what was being said. And one of the things that I saw in the Q&A was a question about motivation to even moving to making this working remotely just a normal or regular part of our life. And I know myself as a baby boomer, that it's really a mind shift of what you were just alluding to, that, well, I can't get a hold of them. Are they even working? I'm used to having to pretty much, check in to say I'm working now. I work from 8 to 5. I have my lunch from 12 to 1. So it is a very big shift, and it works for some. It doesn't work for others. But I think for some folks, especially people for managers, is they want to be sure that the work is getting done. Is it really a skill set issue, or is it they're not available, or what is really kind of going on? And I know that goes back to what you're speaking of about making that human contact. But again, if you're not ever really with that person, you don't know, or you can't trust yourself that what you might be feeling is what's really going on. So,
Yep. Yeah, and I would there's a thing here where if you this comes up in a few different variations where someone says, oh, well, I know what people are doing because I used to manage by walking around the office. I could see them sitting at their chairs. And I have to remind people that that's an attendance check as opposed to a working check. And you'll notice if you do this and you walk around an office, most people have tilted their monitors in a way you can't really see what they're looking at when you walk past, or they'll get these extra privacy screen things to help make sure that you can't see what they're working on when you walk past. And that's not to say people are sitting around playing computer games all day, but people do things like pay bills online. We have a national, what I call a national holiday, which is where everyone comes to work and goes shopping online. It's called Cyber Monday. Like, that's a thing. It changes the stock market. Like, and that's in your office, right? This is a before COVID problem that was still going on. So if you really think that everyone who comes to your office and sits in front of your desk outside your office is constantly working all the time only on work things, I think you have a bigger thing to deal with than just everything we talked about today. That's number one. Number two is how do you know stuff's getting done? Like, that's a real question. Like, Manisha, I need you to do X. It's got to be done by Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Okay, well, did I tell you what needs to get done? Did I tell you when I want it? How often do I want to be updated? Like, do I want to get an update? This is important enough, I want to get hourly updates. Or this is important, I want to, like, it's supposed to be done by Friday at 5. I want to know by Thursday at 5 in case there's a problem and I need to jump in and help. So I will ask, when I ask you, I'll be like, we need to have it done by this. Let's have a prep meeting here. By this meeting at 4 o'clock, by this meeting at 5 o'clock on Thursday, we will have the following things in place. And here's the ticket, or here's the place where I want you to put updates. So I don't have to keep asking you for an update every hour. I'll keep looking at the single source of truth. And this does two things. It brings together this idea that you are clear in the expectations of what you want, and the other person is clear on what the expectations of what is wanted. And sometimes the problem can be that the boss is not asking for the work in a clear way. So the human who's working for the boss, working very hard, is doing the wrong thing because they were asked to do the wrong thing. And how do you find that out? And then over time, is this a management problem? Is this a communication problem? Is this a not understanding the instructions problem? So you need a way to be very, very clear about who's asking for what, by when, and what do they want for updates. So there's tons of people doing stuff about results-oriented workplace or management by objectives and this kind of stuff. This is all how distributed organizations work. And that's essential. If you don't have that, you don't have trust with your coworkers, you don't have, it just all falls apart. And then you may resort to saying, well, I'm going to have everyone come to the office where at least I can check that they're present. And that's not the same.
Yeah, I think it's again, it's a mind shift for a lot of managers and leaders to feel comfortable with this. I think you're right. We are absolutely moving more towards this as just more of a standard way of working. Some people have embraced it, others not so much. But I think for managers in particular, it is really all about learning new ways to, or maybe just not to say that they were doing it right, when people were physically present, but that there are some things that are just really need to be emphasized, like the check-ins, being clear in your directions and that sort of things that we maybe had taken advantage of happening just because we were in front of the person and thinking that they understand, I'm right here, they see what I want, versus now saying, well, it was this thing. I said this task, you should have known that these other things were going to happen. And maybe now we have to stop ourselves and say, no, this task, what I meant by this is, and then be able to explain.
Right. Yeah. And you'll find out in an office scenario, I use the phrase crisp communication. very carefully, crisply organized communication.
Mhm.
In an office scenario, it was very easy for you to say, when Isha comes down and asks John to do something, oh, da, 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 and you're vague on a few things because maybe you haven't thought them out, or maybe you have, and you just implied that any smart human would know this automatically. John is new, John doesn't know, and anyway, I'm here, you can just ask me anytime. So now what you've done is you've set up yourself where you have to be constantly available for me anytime I have a question. And also, I'm going to spend time chasing around, running around in circles before I come back to the boss yet again with another question, wondering at what point are you going to think I'm incompetent?
Mhm.
And so those kind of things went on in offices all the time. And there's a mismatched power dynamic. That's why the section I talk about, the one-on-ones, it's not about here's a report that you send it every night that nobody wants to read. It's not about, because everyone's busy. So I get an email from people who work for me and I get 10 emails and all of them say, I did good things today. I'm like, great, next. If I read them at all. Whereas if I have a one-on-one with you for 30 minutes and you come in with a list of things you did this week, links to all the tickets that have all the work, and things that you're working on this coming week, links to all the work. In theory, that list should match everything that I want you to be working on. And I might be surprised, like, why are you working on that thing? I didn't know that was a real issue. Oh, so-and-so over here says we need it for X. Oh, God, I didn't know. Great, thanks. Or no, actually, I found out that project's not important. You should stop work on this. We need to work on this other thing. But you do that in a one-on-one, not in some sort of an automated nightly email that nobody wants to read, or in like a monthly report when people are just trying to like tell a great story about what the last month was like. It's not actionable in any way.
Yeah. I think this also kind of rounds back to the question that someone asked about the tech tool wars.
Yeah.
There are a lot of tools out there that kind of help with some of managing that and communicating, what's taking place on a particular assignment. I don't know how widely that is used within our Health and Human Services Agency departments. I know that in my office, which is kind of a techie office, we use, I guess, a Kanban board, and that's
Oh, yeah.
something totally new. I'm just learning about this myself. And so maybe everyone knows about it, but it is a way to be able to track assignments and give assignments, keep up with what's going on, and change priorities and all that sort of thing. But again, it kind of comes back to what tools do we use? Are people have the experience or the skill to use those tools? And so I think maybe we're still in this shift of, there's things that are available. There's things that we can be doing to make remote working so much more efficient and easy for everybody. However, I think we're still kind of moving towards how to actually implement these things.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is yes, we are. And this is a lot of organizations. This is like, I semi-joke, semi-serious. This is the biggest shift in workforce and the biggest shift in urban planning since we invented the suburbs in 1947. Like, this is going to change urban planning in a big way. It's going to change commuting in a big way. It's going to change workforce diversity and hiring and recruiting and retention in a big way. And it's changing a lot of organizations that used to think that this was not for them. Now everyone's doing this. And that, you can't go through a lot of change like that with having a lot of questions. Like, what do we do about this? And what do we do about that? And give yourself a bit of slack and not a product placement. Give yourself a bit of give yourself some slack. Give yourself a break and just know that you're doing your best to make your way through something that's a new change. Most of the people you're working for and most of the people who work for you haven't done this before. And you're all making it up as you go along. Now, the catch to watch for is that you don't, as a leader, feel that you need to make pronouncements about this is the decision. Boom. and then a week later make a different decision. Like, oh, that didn't work. This is the new decision. Oh, here's the new decision. If you do this often enough, you'll erode people's confidence in any announcements you make. So watch for that. And then the other one is just ask people what's working, what's not working. For the tools thing that you mentioned, the thing I come back to again, a real question. How do you know if the tool works? Remember the thing I did with the video where I said, between time I think I want to talk to Manisha and the time that Manisha and I are talking, how long does that take for the video call to start? Same, if I want to look at a tracking system, whether it's a Kanban board or like a Google Doc or SharePoint or something like that, how long does it take me to find the thing I want? I want to know it's 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I want to know what's the status of the thing that Manisha's working on that's due for Friday. If it's going to take me 10 minutes of digging around in a giant bottomless pit of files in like a SharePoint or Google Doc or something, and I can't find what it is, then I'm going to want to have a meeting. Or I find something, but it looks out of date, so I'm not sure. Or I find something and it's a huge, big, complicated spreadsheet, and I can't tell what's changed since I last looked in here. So I'm trying to memorize the whole thing and then compare my memory to what I see, and what to see something I need to change. Like that's the tool is not working. You got the wrong tool. You need to be able to look at something and see, like, I last looked at this at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's now 11 o'clock in the morning. There's been no edits or updates. That tells me nothing's changed in the last hour. I look at it and I see that there's an update at, 2 minutes ago, and you have this is done, but I'm stuck on this thing. I don't know what to do here. That's up to date. And I found it very quickly, and I could see the last update, and I have high confidence that I don't have to remember everything. I can read the last update. That's the tool is working for you. So the question is, how do you find these tools and get rid of the tools that are not working, agree what's important for the tools to be considered useful, and then get rid of the ones that don't, and only use ones that work. And by the way, you should be using working tools even if you're in the office, but that's a whole other story.
So, John, we're coming up on the hour. I want to thank you. This has been a very informative presentation. It's just really great. I know everyone's like crossing their fingers that they're the ones that's going to get your book and be able to get more information. But I think we've dropped some links on how to find out more about either purchasing your book or just linking in with you. So hopefully people will continue to be able to pick your brain and hear what you have to say about that. I do want to go, before we wrap up, I want to remind people that the video will be posted on CDII's YouTube channel, and to be on the lookout for the links and a copy of today's slide deck that we will also have available. And I want to remind people of some upcoming events. So on October 12th, 10:30 to 12, we will have a data visualization webinar featuring Andy Krakoff. He'll present helpful tips related to visualizing health and social services data, as well as strategies to help ensure that data are presented in engaging and cogent ways. It will examine how to incorporate human-centered design principles into data displays. It's going to be amazing. And then also on October 26th, we have part 2 of data visualization with Noah Elinsky. He will share his insights on data visualizations, particularly on dashboards, the benefit of dashboards, what to keep in mind when designing them, and how to design better ones. He'll also discuss how data visualization drives change and what the future may hold. You'll receive invitations to both of these events, so please take advantage of the great speakers. And let's not forget our annual Expo event. So the 2022 Data Expo will take place on February 22nd. This virtual event will highlight some of agencies' data initiatives, and there will be some dynamic speakers presenting on various topics and initiatives related to equity. So you can expect more about the Expo in the coming months. But I just wanted to thank everyone. Please join CDII as we build our data community, and wish everyone to have a really great day. And thank you, John.
You are totally welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.